Happy Monday, everyone. This is Dr. Patrick Callas, ND. Thanks to you, everyone who's joining me live or watching the recording here of my third webinar with Disability Foundation here. Thank you so much for hosting and having me on. I really appreciate that. For anyone who didn't see my first two talks, first one on immunity, second one on anxiety, I'll give you a little intro and then we'll get right to it. Today's talk is on depression. Saying depression is not a bad word. I tried to be a little bit more playful, including the wording here, which was suggested, the title which was suggested to me. I'm a naturopathic physician. I've been practicing for just over 8 years in beautiful British Columbia. I graduated from the Boucher Institute of Naturopathic Medicine and had my own practice in Salt Spring Island for almost 5 years called Island Natural Health that I set up and run. And then my wife and I decided it was time to have a change because we both grew up in Salt Spring, so lovely place, but we were looking for something a little different at that point. And I sold my practice to another fantastic ND named Dr. Brad Dunstan and moved over to Vancouver to teach both in the classroom and clinically, as well as take up other different practice opportunities. I'll give you my contact info at the end if you're looking to reach out to me for speaking events, for for any organization groups that you maybe have, or if you're looking to become a patient, I'm accepting patients. If you live within British Columbia, I can help you out. And if you don't live in this province, I certainly could recommend a trusted colleague in other provinces if you're joining us from out of province or even possibly somewhere in the US. So happy 2021, everyone. It's been quite a interesting start to a year, loaded word there. But here's to a healthier, happier, less viral 2021 and some stability south of the border for our neighbors there or for anyone who's joining us from the US. My focus in practice has been mainly in supporting cancer care. So I do a lot of integrative cancer care to support people in treating active cancer, supporting with radiation, chemo, and that's naturopathic medicine can help reduce some of the significant side effects or adverse effects from chemo and radiation, and even help recover surgery. And there's lots of remedies can do to have a positive impact on cancers, as well as powerfully help reduce risk or even prevent reoccurrence or occurrence if you're cancer free. I also do treat a lot of chronic and complex infections and work a lot with mental health. Myself, I had my own journey with anxiety and severe anxiety, very bad digestion, and even experienced post-traumatic stress disorder after a really difficult period of my life in my early to mid 20s. So this hits home close to me, and I take real pride in helping out and in providing remedies that work, that have evidence and that work in practice and that are achievable. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about depression. I had this little, to set the tone here, fuck off to 2020 and other things, and depression too, F off. Disease is not a bad word. I thought, let's go there. The hidden curse bear. So symptoms of depression, I'm not going to read all these out. It's a bit more complex. Sometimes you can read websites or may yourself have just a few things in mind, but it can be quite a few symptoms. And the diagnosis of depression or clinical depression usually means you have a certain amount of these criteria at play. It's not all of them. It's not just one of them. So, it's, won't go into the actual number of criteria there, but just to say that, there's some key things that are usually in there. Fatigue, certainly feeling guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, pessimism or hopelessness, lack of pleasure, which we in medicine call hedonism, where you're just not able to experience pleasure, feel very much pleasure, or derive a normal amount of pleasure from things you used to. Those are pretty big indicators. Usually a change in appetite. It could be increase or decrease. And then disturbed sleep, which I'm going to go into more about that, because sleep itself can be a bit of a chicken and egg issue with depression. And this is describing more clinical depression, which I'll say is, you know, it's gonna be more severe than sort of just, I feel depressed or sad or low. I will talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And then the other key things I highlighted there to keep in mind with depression is that it's overwhelming. At the end of the day, whatever symptoms you're experiencing, they're overwhelming, they're dominating your life. And I just point that out because having a low mood or even some forms of depression, I think is part of normal human experience. It's just when it's longer lasting for weeks or months, is overwhelming, is interfering with your life, and starts to manifest physical symptoms. And those three criteria really mean it's trending into in the area of clinical depression, and additional help then is definitely needed. I mean, whenever you're experiencing depression, come get your NDs help, get friends help, like recruit resources. You're not alone. There really shouldn't be a stigma about mental health. I think it's starting to change and shift, but some of the older generations still, and then, you know, even current generations may feel that there's a certain like extra level of weakness somehow involved with mental health issues. But it's okay to talk about heart attacks, diabetes, these physical pathologies or illnesses, and it's unfortunate that that's not the case with mental health. I remember being in New Zealand and seeing ads about depression, and just how normalizing, how that, you know, it's like they've listed stats how common it is, and just trying to open up the dialogue. And I thought that was the early 2000s. I thought that was really refreshing. You know, I never seen that in Canada, certainly not in the US. It's always the drug ads you usually see. This drug might be right for you. Here's the 80 side effects. Anyway, so depression, and I say depression's here more than being sad. And what I mean by that is seasonal affective disorder is low mood or depressed state that occurs usually during winter, often and largely linked to low vitamin D status, which is rampant in Canada and parts of the northern US. The average Canadian has deficient vitamin D levels, which is which is very low. And even when we reach adequate levels, it's nowhere near optimal, which is where, for lots of reasons, we ought to be. So I'll talk a little bit about vitamin D later on, but just to say, although it's not going to cure clinical depression, it may be a positive contributing factor, especially if you're in the average Canadian vitamin D level, which is low. Men a little bit lower than women, so even more important for us. And I often get that, well, I don't take it in the summer, I'm outside a lot in the summer. Most of us don't get significant enough sun exposure. The only times I've ever seen good levels of vitamin D or anywhere approaching decent, rarely ever optimal, is literally like lifeguards, landscapers, people who are like brown from being out in the sun, because it's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. where we get peak sun, which is vitamin D conversion, and you need significant skin exposure to the sun. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because I think it's good to get out in the sun, it's enjoyable, but we have to be careful that we're not getting fried often, because it will cause increased risk of skin cancer longer term, because it's radiation exposure and premature skin aging. So those are things to be aware of. Some sun exposure is great, but optimizing your D through sun exposure is probably not the best idea. So it's one you would want to take some more of. Anyway, I digress. Just to re-emphasize that clinical depression is a bit more than just sadness, grief, or melancholy. For anyone who has experienced or was alive, enjoying music, alt rock in the 90s. Melancholy Infinite Sadness is there. There's a little Smashing Pumpkins album. That one spoke to my teenage soul at the time. I remember listening to that again and again on a Discman, one of those old spin the CDs. Yep, I'm old enough to remember that. Great album, but I have severely biased nostalgia for it. Anyway, and here I'm saying, and it may sound like I'm contradicting myself, but just to say that sadness, grief after a loss of any kind, or melancholy, are normal human experiences, and those can need support too, but they are distinctive or different. They're the easy, lighter end of the spectrum, even though they may not feel it, towards clinical depression. And here I said sadness, is often served in older generations as a code word for feeling depressed or even having depression, because it's something they didn't want to talk about or admit. So it's someone seems to be sad a lot of the time, out of disproportionate to what cause might be, or there's somebody who doesn't often share or have a support network, then that might be, especially in seniors, that might be something to explore, make sure they're getting support there, because it's certainly senior populations are more affected by depression for some of the risk factors like social isolation we're going to talk about later, especially after the last year, where we're all a bit more social, or a lot more socially isolated than we have previously been. And just to say that these things can occur together, right? Someone actually could have clinical depression or get into clinical depression after a period or parallel to a period of grief, but they may be actually distinctive, although intertwining causes. The same with seasonal affective disorder. Depression, it's not a coincidence that depression can become worse or more pronounced in the winter when there's this added stressor, shorter days, lower vitamin D levels, and all colder weather, all these things that change for us. The key thing is to talk about and get help, because it is all too common to experience depression or at least depressed states. Causes, we're going to talk about some of the root causes of depression. There's a whole bunch here, and it's never, it's rarely just a factor of one. So don't let this overwhelm you, especially if you're experiencing depression and feeling overwhelmed. Just say, as an individual, there may be different facets. And as a naturopathic doctor, we really want to look at what are the causes, and then how can we treat you as an individual, which is what individualized medicine is all about. And certainly naturopathic medicine is all about that approach, that we want to treat you as an individual, not just as someone who has depression. If you happen to have depression or a certain specific diagnosis of depression, we want to say, okay, well, why? Why is it what factors have led to you to that state? Because it's just, whatever imbalances have come into play have pushed you into that state. And how can we bring you back to a balance point to optimize your mental health, your physical health, and even your spiritual health? That's something you are developing focus on or want to discuss. And your ND is open to discussing those things. Anyway, so first thing that I mentioned earlier is poor sleep. It becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, because insomnia or disrupted sleep, whether it's falling asleep or waking up or both, will aggravate or can bring on worse depressive states. So it kind of comes hand in hand, and it becomes a bit of a snowballing effect. That's why I call it a vicious cycle there. And the problem is that when you're not sleeping well, you're getting pushed further out of balance. At night, it's when our body does a lot of repairs. In healthy sleep, we're resting, and the system is repairing itself and healing itself. And so if sleep is disrupted, those repair mechanisms, say, to our body and our brain in particular, is not working optimally. And so you can see how you get a bit of a catch-22. You're not able to sleep, and we're going to consider depression as imbalance or some sort of injury, or possibly contributed to by an injury or imbalance in the body. Then we are in a much more difficult state to heal it when we're not sleeping, when we're not going to the optimal repair cycle. And one thing that happens when we're not in a good sleep pattern is to make melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. It induces sleep. If you're, it's at nighttime when you have that sort of, oh, I feel heavy, I feel like onset of sleep, that's your brain, the pituitary gland, your brain dropping melatonin into your bloodstream. Essentially, it's a triggering and releasing that, and it's causing a sleep response. However, with sleep disruption, that is impaired, and the body will start to steal melatonin's cousin, serotonin. And it can go either way, but in this case, when sleep's disrupted, is often the body's going to start robbing your serotonin levels. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter, which is a brain communication molecule that makes us feel satiated and calm, and is certainly highly linked when it's out of balance or low to being in lower mood or depression. It's one of the reasons why that often antidepressants have an effect, sometimes direct or indirect, on serotonin levels. So poor sleep is going to impact that serotonin negatively for you. And we can talk about some more ways we can improve serotonin besides just getting sleep, because it's a little tough if you're feeling depressed and the only thing I told you is get better sleep. You're like, well, why all these other factors are interfering? I can't sleep because I'm depressed. I can't get out of depression because I can't sleep. So let's talk about ways we can improve that in a little bit. Hormones that play a big role in depression. Hormones are these little molecules in our body. We make dozens of different types, but I'm going to just point out the key ones here. They're little molecules, and they have a huge effect. And whatever your memory of biology is, all you have to do is think of what happens in puberty. The difference between male and female genders, at least as a sexual phenotype, like body expression, hair, or the common characteristics, and acknowledging there's a variety of ways we may gender identify ourselves there. But the sort of two basic binary types that exist in nature are influenced essentially in women by higher estrogen, progesterone levels, and then men it's the higher testosterone. It makes that huge difference in the body. And those hormones play a role in mood. Not surprisingly, low or imbalanced estrogen and progesterone can cause would contribute to depression, especially in women, but even to some degree in men as well. And testosterone, low testosterone, can be linked to low mood or depression, more so in men, especially men that are going through andropause, which is not as talked about, but men have their own sort of more subtle, usually subtle, but steady decline in hormone levels that's somewhat parallel to menopause. Sometimes it occurs a little bit later in men, but that lowering can cause a lowering of mood, but it does affect women as well. Having inadequate amounts of testosterone and some of its related hormones can have a big role in mood and energy, libido. Testosterone is one of the main drivers of libido in men and women. Even when there's different levels between men and women with it, it's a key player. So, and one of the things that I didn't emphasize, but certainly low libido or loss of a libido is a symptom of depression from a lot of folks. And low thyroid hormone. Thyroid is this little gland that sits just below the Adam's apple, and then it feels like it's a little butterfly-shaped gland, beautiful little thing, and it's like the thermometer. It sets the metabolism, so all the rates of the body. It has a huge impact. I think of it kind of like the coach. It has a huge impact on all the other hormones. I think of it like the coach of all the other hormones to some degree. It really sets rates there. And low thyroid is exceedingly common, more so in women than men. For a variety of reasons, but it can affect either. Certainly there's a family history, it's going to be a larger cause. And it plays a big role, as a very specific type of depression, postpartum or depression after pregnancy. From my perspective, there's a big shift, a big change, lack of sleep. There's a whole bunch of things playing a role there for women who experience that. But one thing that hasn't been very well talked about, and I didn't even learn about when I was in school, is low thyroid can play a huge role in postpartum depression. And a majority of women who experience it, if their thyroid was treated, could be significantly improved by treating their thyroid. So it's really, really worth looking at. And the key thing I'll say, if you've had your thyroid tested or someone who has it, the doctor said it's normal. The current range for thyroid health is so wide that it's not very helpful. It's normal, maybe it's nowhere near optimal, especially I see it more for women. And I'll say is the standard test here in Canada is something called TSH for thyroid stimulating hormone. And for anyone experiencing symptoms of depression or low thyroid, if your TSH level is above 2.5, but in the range, so it's 5 point something is the upper range. But if you're between 2.5 and 5, I would suggest you have a suboptimal thyroid. It may be a minor thing, or it may be a major thing that's influencing mood, energy, weight, and more for you. So take a look into it. And key thing there that can be funny about it is classically a low functioning thyroid is thought of like more, everything sort of slows down, is low, or people feel cold and heavy. But there is a subset of that group with low thyroid who actually experience anxiety, particularly panic. So just a heads up that if you're like, I don't have depression, but I'm anxious and I wonder about my thyroid, it'd be worth at least testing and getting a proper assessment of your thyroid to see if that's an issue. Because classically in medical literature, standard medical literature, anxiety is more like hyperactive thyroid. It's sort of like everything's too hot, running too fast, agitation. And that is a classic presentation that can occur, but just a heads up, the opposite can occur as well there as far as the mood goes. Imbalanced cortisol, I went into that more both my earlier talks on immunity and anxiety, that cortisol, the stress hormone, when it's out of balance, can play a big role, because when we're under constant chronic stress, it impacts all other hormone levels. Cortisol is a bit of a bully in the system for a very good reason. When we're under stress, fight or flight mode is engaged, and the body's like, I don't need to do repairs right now. I don't want to deal with digestion. I don't want to have sex. I just want to fight, flee, or freeze to evade this stressor, which is okay in an acute short-term situation, but it's a problem when we start stacking all the modern day, so many stressors, especially after a year with a pandemic and all sorts of political instability in the world, on top of all the normal stressors that were supposedly normal, modern day stressors, it becomes a lot of things to bear. And so stress hormone cortisol can go out of balance really easily. A real classic sign, if you feel wired but tired at night, that like you feel exhausted but you can't go to sleep, or you're waking in the middle of the night frequently, that can be a sign of cortisol imbalance. It can even cause hot flashes in men and women when cortisol's out of balance, partly because it's interfering with other hormone levels in the body. So it's really important we can regulate and moderate our stress, which is a whole nother talk, and I will suggest a few remedies when we get to the remedies part. But it is so key. You know, the things we do to cast votes for being calm, resting, digesting, being connected with people, and remedies that can help shift us back into that mode to spend more time out of stress mode is so, so important. It doesn't mean you should never have stress and there'll be never, you can live in a world without stress. I mean, power to you if you can do that. It kind of feels like that would be an enlightenment state. But the more we can shift that teeter-totter, you know, with the elephant of stress towards rest, relax, digest, acceptance, meditation, all those things is so, so important. So it's really about casting those votes or stacking more of the friendly helper kids against the elephant there. And then more of a contributor is imbalanced insulin, because it does have an direct impact in the brain based on the consequences that occur down the road. There's been this sort of loosely held term about Alzheimer's disease being like diabetes type 3, meaning the blood sugar impact causes degeneration and damage to the brain. And certainly Alzheimer's and depression can go hand in hand. I mean, any dementia or significant brain illness like that, which we'll go into a little bit more later. So regulating our blood sugar levels and maintaining regular insulin response is really, really important. So it's one of the things that needs to be addressed to help resolve or improve depression. Gut problems. This is like ND bread and butter. Here we go. Any gut problems that are ongoing, chronic or severe: gas, bloating, heartburn, nausea, vomiting, constipation, and/or diarrhea. Anything that is causing you digestive distress that is more than just on occasion is something you need to deal with. And the gut is the center of your body. All the wonderful foods you eat is a nutrient that builds our body. It's, you know, the medicine you take every day is the food you eat. And it's not just eating those good foods, which hopefully you're doing or will be inspired to do more of, but it's also how well do you absorb it? Because you could eat an amazing diet, but if your digestion is just like upset all the time, you're not absorbing all those good nutrients. So you're kind of throwing away some of those good nutrients, which is not to say stop eating those good foods, but it means that it's an imperative that you repair your gut. Because it's so crucial for our mental health. The connection there is so profound. Besides our brain and brainstem, the most nerves live in our digestive tract. So you better bet they have a direct connection. That saying like, I got a gut feeling is actually quite true. We actually can perform sort of like proto-feelings. There's research on this. These sort of like premonitions of feelings that then get translated into emotions in our brain through our gut. So it does play a role, and vice versa, right? Feeling stressed, feeling anxious, goes to our guts. Some people more than others. Some people it's like, you know, super sensitive, and others not so sensitive. And I would suggest for those who are very sensitive, like I can be very sensitive and have been in the past, is a sign that your guts, it's sort of a bittersweet. It's an early warning system, but also it probably means there's some repair that needs to happen there, even if symptoms are a bit vague or infrequent. That if you're really sensitive digestive tract, means there's something there that's going to be is out of balance for you, even subtle. One of the things that can be out of balance is the gut bacteria, dysbiosis. That word there on the second line there. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but it means imbalance of bacteria, meaning that there's bacteria, viruses, parasites, mold that's out of balance in our gut. So it's all about having a good residency. It's not about only having the best tenants and having none of these other things. It's about having, you know, as healthy a population, a varied population, and having more of the good tenants in the right places along our intestines. So it's a whole other topic, but just to say that that is crucial. And something, fun fact for you, I'll give you a few, but this fun fact, the gut bacteria, because the bacteria living in your intestines right now weighs more than your liver, and it does more jobs than your liver. Your liver does so many tasks, hundreds and hundreds of tasks. So those bacteria are essential for us. They help us absorb nutrients, they help us strengthen our immune system, they help defend our immune system, they influence our emotions and mental health. So, and I've seen this before. I've seen sometimes people just taking large doses of probiotics and having improvement in mood, having a positive impact depression and pain in their body. So it can be profound. It's not, I wouldn't just do that, but just having those good bacteria coming in and balancing the population there is so crucial. Allergies and sensitivities or intolerances or immune reactions that cause injury or damage ongoingly to our gut. I'll talk about more of those later. They're linked to our inflammation, which is another bullet point we'll go through. And then autoimmune conditions. If you have an autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel diseases like Crohn's or colitis, MS, I would argue there's always a link to the gut there. It may be a minor point or maybe major, but the majority of your immune system lies in your gut. And so if your immune system starts to attack itself or go rogue, there's a good chance that there is something going on in your gut, whether it's just a contributing factor or possibly a causative factor. I would look into it because I have never seen someone with significant autoimmune condition that doesn't have some sort of digestive issues and that could be addressed, improved on, and have a positive impact on them. You know, it's not, may not resolve their condition, but that certainly could put it into a much better state and even put it to a dormant state. So keep that in mind. There's lots that can be done, and the gut is so key, it's so crucial. So inflammation, you can see there the gut-brain connection. There is a lot of communication through the nervous system and through other that occurs between brain and our enteric nervous system, which is our digestive tract. And while the brain is mostly a closed system and that has tight borders called the blood-brain barrier, it is not impermeable to irritation or even certain microbes and toxins, which we'll talk more about shortly here. And certainly the more inflamed and irritated your gut is, the worse your digestion is, the higher risk you're going to have problems with inflammation, irritation going to your brain. And it can be direct. Some of the toxins the bacteria put off, some of the toxins you might start absorbing if your gut's irritated and the barrier there is breaking down, can start to get into the bloodstream and start to cross into your brain and cause significant problems. I mean, it's no wonder if you've ever had enough like a significant digestive upset or sensitive to digestive upset, that it can be hard to focus, that memory can seem to be blurry or impaired, or concentration in some people. I remember when my gut was still really irritated if I had too much wheat. It was like I was getting sedated and drunk. You would have thought I was drunk if I ate, like, if I went up for enough like pita bread, beer. I mean, it had some alcohol in there too, but it was largely the gluten and wheat protein for me at that time that I was really sensitive. My immune system was sensitive to, and it was causing neurological like irritation and inflammation that looked like I was made me feel fatigued and drunk. So you can see how that would play a significant role. And one thing I didn't mention is 80% of our serotonin, which is again a feel-good brain chemical, is made and stored in our gut. It's like the grain warehouses. So if the grain warehouse is on fire, there's another reason why you can see that imbalance can occur in the brain itself. That you have one of these brain chemicals that's oddly enough stored in the gut, made and stored, that there's going to be an impairment occurring there in how we feel in mood and contributing to depression or anxiety for people. So neuroinflammation linked to gut inflammation, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. We'll talk about a few other causes like infection and toxins shortly here. And just read this quote. It was from 2020 Nature Communications journal. It says, growing evidence indicates a reciprocal relationship between low-grade systemic inflammation and stress exposure towards increased vulnerability to neuropsychiatric disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder. So what that's saying is low-grade systemic inflammation, meaning ongoing, like in your gut or elsewhere in your body, and ongoing stress increase your risk of disorders like severe as post-traumatic stress disorder, and certainly in the mix there, anxiety and clinical depression, among others, are there. And there's lots of research, but I didn't want to put a whole pile of quotes in there. There's one of many, and I've seen that more and more emerging, that even from MDs, more open-minded MDs, and just the medical research occurring that connection is there, and it's really profound. This is a whole nother talk. I literally do a 90-minute talk on acute infections like Lyme disease. So if you want to know more about that, invite me back for another talk or come see me if it's something you're concerned about. Certainly we do have ticks in the West Coast and parts of the East Coast in Canada. If you look at the epidemiology data in the US, there's high concentrations near New York, Lyme, Connecticut, and lesser so, but still somewhat on the West Coast here. And then it seems to disappear, which I know Dr. Ernie Murakami, who's a retired MD who treated a lot of Lyme disease and other tick-borne infections in Hope, BC. would joked that, well, Canada Customs must be doing a bang up job stopping all this ticks, but it's just that the data hasn't been as robust as some of the American data over the last decades, of course. So it's a real concern. I used to live in Salt Spring Island, as I mentioned, and I diagnosed 3 different cases of Lyme disease. One of them was chronic, that had been misdiagnosed, and the poor young woman was experiencing nerve problems and low mood or depression, partly because they'd been going on for a while and no one had picked up or had a mind to consider that a tick carrying bacteria could be an issue. And the reason for, in particular, Lyme disease, which is a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi, is that it is a spirochete, which means it's a corkscrew-shaped bacteria. And the only 2 corkscrew-shaped bacteria that infect and cause illness in humans are Lyme, Borrelia, and syphilis. And both of them have the characteristics that if you leave them untreated for long enough, those little corkscrews do what you might imagine functionally they do. They start burrowing to joint tissue and eventually into nerve and brain tissue. And so we know that something called tertiary, or the last stage of syphilis infection, is brain infection, significant brain infection, and the problems that occur. So you can see that a subtler or earlier stage could certainly be linked to depression or other mood disorders. So it's something to keep in mind if you live somewhere where there are ticks, or you've been bitten by ticks, which we often don't see them or notice them because they hang on, have a blood meal for hours, and often in the night or somewhere dark and hairy where we can't see them, and then they detach and go away and we don't even know it. But so it's important, if you're going out somewhere you're going to be exposed, to cover up, or have your partner tick check you, or tick check yourself best you can with mirrors, etc. Because if you treat it early, better it is. But long list here, there's lots of possible causes. The other thing I'll point out on the list here is that viral encephalitis, which just means brain inflammation, encephalitis, can be caused by things like herpes type 1 and 2, which we might classically think of as oral herpes, cold sores, and type 2 being genital herpes, although it's not quite that simple. It's sort of classically how we view it. Either south could go north and north-south, so to speak. But the prevalence of cold sores, lots of people have them. I know several people in my family that do. I was lucky that I didn't get it, but it's really high to have really high, like a high incidence in the population. A majority of us have been exposed, even if we don't have cold sores. And so that can be a cause to mood. It can cause irritation or inflammation in the brain, and that can be linked to depression and mood alteration. And then certain gut viruses, which I won't belabor because we already talked how the gut and the brain are linked. One of the things that gut viruses will release are certain toxins that can directly be neurotoxic to us. So it's both can be an indirect irritation they're causing in the gut, and this link and connection that I mentioned already, and then directly the toxins, like some of those toxins from certain bacteria, or sorry, in this case viruses, can cross the barrier and cause irritation. And although exceedingly rare, there are fungal infections if severe enough, including Candida, which is a natural or normally found in small amounts in our gut, but can overgrow. And certainly, we've been using a lot of antibiotics or eat too much sugar and sweets in our diet. It can overgrow readily, and it can be linked, when severe, to mood alteration and depression, because its toxins and irritants can start to affect both the whole body and then even directly the brain in some cases. So again, it goes back to having a healthy gut and using antibiotics only when needed, minimally. And then depression can also be secondary to other diseases. I mean, I've already kind of alluded and even talked about some of these directly, but low thyroid, after heart attack or stroke, it's really common to have a period of depression, and it may not just be a short period. So it's something to be aware of for any of you or any of your loved ones experienced any cardiovascular disease. Then there is high likelihood they're at high risk afterwards. So it's something to have support in place for. Any kind of trauma, physical or mental trauma, can be linked to causing or aggravating depression. Encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, which we're already kind of talking about some of the reasons why that might be, from head trauma to bacteria, viruses, infections, and then any neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and the whole list of them. And although these aren't diagnoses, I want to go into these 3 points you can see on the left there: toxins, medications, and nutrient deficiencies, because as sort of just a sneaky little way to add in some of these viewpoints for you about other contributing or possibly causative factors. As I said on the anxiety talk, I have seen patients before who, in this case, had anxiety, and fixing their diet, putting a few good supports in place, eliminating some food allergens or intolerances, I've heard get them 50% better or 70% better. Like there was this big improvement there. And then sometimes a few times I've seen the thing that was the remaining barrier was eliminating toxic metals or heavy metals. Heavy metals. The reason I put the Mad Hatter there from the original Lewis Carroll book is because he is mad because he's a caricature of the Victorian Hatter. And the Victorian Hatters used this horrible chemical slurry that included a lot of mercury in it. And so they were literally toxic with mercury. If you read the book, you'll note the Hatter is belching, I think farting as well, and kind of red cheeked. You might think he's drunk. That is also signs, I mean, who knows what's in that tea, but that is also a sign of mercury poisoning. It is a strong neurotoxin, so it can certainly impact the brain, pushing us in whichever direction we're more prone, whether that being more anxiety in those patients' cases I mentioned, or depression. I've seen it contribute to depression before, and chronic migraines, immune suppression. There's lots of things that can really cause a problem with. Lead, drinking water, paint, fuel. We've put lots of this in the environment since the Industrial Revolution. Mercury too, we get a lot from seafood. People always ask me, do you recommend not eating seafood? I think there's too much benefit, unless you're vegan or all plant-based, and certainly, don't eat fish. But for those of us that aren't strictly vegan or plant-based in their diet, there's lots of value. I would just say eat more local fish, salmon, trout, and small fish like sardines, because they are lower in mercury. It's just the big fish like tuna, well, more so in the big fish, I should say, like tuna, marlin, swordfish, that are very toxic in mercury and other toxins because they're big fish. They bioaccumulate, meaning all the other fishies and things they eat, they're getting it from them as well. They're very fatty, so they store some toxins in their fat, and they travel more polluted waters than just coastal fish like salmon. So I would limit those, and even whitefish like cod and halibut, as tasty as it is sort of moderate in its mercury levels. So have that as an occasional treat, but I wouldn't eat it all the time because it is going to put more mercury in your system, and that is not a good thing. No mercury is what we want, but we're all being exposed to at least small levels all the time. And then aluminum is also neurotoxic. So thankfully it's been largely removed from pots and pans, and hopefully a lot of underarm deodorants. But those are just a few of the toxic metals. And there I use toxic to be more accurate. It's not just to be scary, because aluminum is not a heavy metal. If anyone's ridden an aluminum bike or picked up aluminum can, you know that to be true, but it certainly is toxic and kind of gets classified in that group there. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other metals that could play a role, but those are sort of the three big ones. And when I test for heavy metals, which I do a lot of through urine, I've seen thousands of levels, and the most common things in Canada, or in some, I shouldn't say in Canada, on the West Coast where we are, is lead and mercury. We see a lot of lead and mercury from food, water, and industrial exposures. Ethanol is just a fancy word for alcohol. It depletes B vitamins and can be linked to worsening depression. I mean, if someone is significantly enough an alcoholic or not depleting or getting enough B vitamins, it can be causative of depression. So certainly getting your B vitamins back in for what is really important. Narcotics, there's a laundry list, and it could be linked to depression. I mean, some could be used because of depression. It could be kind of a bit of a loop there. You're depressed, and for whatever reason, you're using a stimulant, and they actually can end up being linked to worsening depressive mood or state of depression. So certainly getting off those is very important. Again, it will also deplete some of our nutrient levels in detoxifying alcohol and drugs. Our body will use B vitamins and other nutrients like glutathione, which we're going to talk about later, which can be very important to our mental well-being. Glutamate and nitric oxide, we both need some of them in our body, so it's not that they're all bad and you should never have them. It's about balance, and here it's enough but not too much. Glutamate you'd find in MSG. It would be the most classic example. The G is glutamate, monosodium glutamate. It's a neuroirritant. It can be linked is linked to depression. Too much nitrous can also be linked. Not likely one you're going to be exposing yourself to as much there, but just so you know. And then funny little one, more is just interest point. I'm not saying Botox is going to cause or cure depression, to be clear here, but botulinum toxin in large enough amounts is certainly neurotoxic. That's why it paralyzes the nerve, so it stops you from moving as much for 3 months if you or someone you know has done Botox therapy. And they've done some, I was looking through some studies, so don't take this as conclusive because it was just more of just a curiosity. I was peeking around. And it seemed that like sometimes Botox, like literally for therapeutic reasons, which could be migraines or for people who sweat excessively, but also for aesthetics, can have a positive effect. I mean, feeling like we're looking good or resolving migraines for sure can have a very positive effect on our mood and help with depression. Although there was also another study I was looking at that said that if it specifically muscles that would make it hard to smile, so you can only pout, we actually, when we smile, let's do it. Even if you don't feel like it, even if you feel like an idiot, let's smile. It actually triggers neurotransmitter release and hormones that make us feel a little better. So it's as annoying as it is, especially if you're experiencing depression. And not just that, it may sound like such an annoying thing to say, smile more. You don't have to do it in public. And you don't want to be like that old, like, smile more, honey, like, oh, gross. But in your privacy of your own home, you can maybe have a laugh and then smile, because it does help. And so perhaps paralyzing those muscles may have a negative effect on our mood. Okay. I'm not going to read these all. There's a long list of medications that can cause or aggravate depression. Even something as seemingly innocuous as an acne medication, isotretinoin, has been linked with it. Or OCPs, or oral contraceptive pills, the birth control pill. I've seen this particularly in young women, and sometimes the health clinics, even ones that I think are quite good, are not really on the ball with this. So I've seen this pattern before, and maybe it's just because I was lucky or unlucky enough to be in my early university days to know and even date women who, when they switched or went on to birth control, suddenly experienced depression, and going off it resolved it. I mean, there could be other factors at that point, but mucking around with hormone levels can have a big impact. Again, small amount can have a huge impact. So it's just something to be aware of. And for most of them, switching the type of birth control can be helpful. And sometimes going off is necessary. And usually there's a reason for that. It's usually that person's body is already imbalanced and probably has difficulty breaking down hormones. So the funny thing about hormones is if we don't break them down very well, they can actually become more toxic to us or more irritating to our nervous system in that breakdown phase, not their initial kind of form, but as they break down, which again is something to do with genetics, which I'll briefly touch on in this talk, but if I went into detail, we'd be here all day. Some blood pressure meds, beta blockers is unclear. It's a common one though, so I listed it. Some of the other ones like Respirin are pretty uncommon, but just be aware there are some blood pressure meds. And even although it's pretty uncommon, statins, as harmless as it can be, sometimes can aggravate or contribute to depression. So it's one thing, if you didn't seem to be depressed before starting a statin med for your cholesterol levels, something to take a look into and potentially remove. There's certainly lots of great natural ways you can improve your cholesterol levels that I think are more profound and more healing than statins. So there you go. Corticosteroids like prednisone, long-term or high dose can play a role in depression. Chemotherapy for obvious, and then of course, because it's directly so toxic, definitely can lead to depression. Proton pump inhibitors, which are like Nexium, which are for acid reflux. It's really rare that it does, but they don't really know why. I would suggest that it's probably because proton pump inhibitors muck around with their digestion. It makes it harder for it to absorb minerals, which we'll talk about how important those are, and just more difficult to break apart proteins and fat with lower stomach acid. Yes, it's not refluxing up, but now your digestive strength, as it were, in your stomach when you need it is weakened by those medications. The thing I want to emphasize there is I'm not a fan of them at all. I do think that short-term use can be safe and effective, but being on them for months or years, which I've seen too many times, decades, it's not a good idea. It comes with some significant problems. So as much as they sell them like over-the-counter candy, I would be very cautious with proton pump inhibitors, even if it's only a minor likelihood that's contributing to depression or low mood. And then sometimes stimulants, although it's a little hard to say, things like Ritalin, the data is a bit mixed there because depression itself will cause similar symptoms to some of the similar symptoms to it, but just something to keep an eye on. It is actually something that some doctors will prescribe them alongside antidepressants. I don't think it's a very common practice from looking at the literature. And nutrient deficiencies, the key things I want to point out here are B vitamins, particularly folate, which is vitamin B9, and vitamin B6. Then vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Now, another fun fact, because I promised more than one, is that vitamin D is not actually a vitamin. It is built out of cholesterol, and the only thing in our bodies that are built out of cholesterol that are functional in this way are hormones. So vitamin D is actually the sunshine hormone, but we call it vitamin D. Again, small amount has a big impact. That's why it can play a big role when our levels go down, particularly in the winter when we get even less sunshine, or we're locked inside with COVID. Vitamin D goes down, and it has impact. Certainly contributes to seasonal affective disorder. And again, I wouldn't say that vitamin D is ever causative of clinical depression, but it just may be a contributing factor or worsening the low mood. So it's one thing we can at least help lift up or improve. And we want to get to optimal levels, not just adequate levels. And again, the majority of Canadians are deficient in vitamin D, and that's not a good thing. It's so important for brain health, for mood, for immune function, to reduce the risk of cancer, and so forth. It's such a big player in bone health and more. Minerals here, iron, or having iron deficiency anemia is a big one. So a recent injury, or for women who have heavy or prolonged periods, you're at higher risk there, and it can cause depression, having anemia, low mood, fatigue. It's kind of symptoms it can cause. So they're very much in alignment with being a factor, or causative or contributing. And then iodine and selenium, they have a really strong role with thyroid health. So, and a lot of us do not get enough of them. So getting enough in your diet is really important. And a minor player, but worth mentioning, is zinc, because it plays so much role with hormone production and immunity, and plays 1,000+ different roles in the body. One thing that I didn't list here, but I'm going to mention for things we want to add in, would be also getting enough omega-3 fatty acids from seafood, or possibly vegetable sources, but I'll go into that a little bit more as we sprint through what to do next. So first, genetics. Two more things here. Genetics can play a role, can be something to explore. How we deal with nutrients in our body. Going back to the theme that FU bear, and depression is not a bad word. You may see that cluster of capital letters and go, mother fur. That is methyl tetrahydrofolate receptor, and it has to do with how we use and convert folate or folic acid from its dietary form to an active form in our body called methylfolate. And more than 50% of North Americans have some deficiency there. It could be mild to very strong. And so what that means is, no matter how much good vitamin B rich foods or folate, like whole grains, that you eat, you may not convert it to enough to keep your body and your mental health in optimal state. So getting an active B vitamin can be very helpful. And I'd say a minority, but a minority of cases, sometimes that alone can be really profound. There are a few single cases where something as strong as bipolar disorder, which is when people fluctuate from a hypermanic or a hyperactive state down to a clinically depressed or severe depressed state, has significantly been improved by just getting the methylfolate at the right amount over the amount of time. Usually it's going to be more than that, to be clear, but that's, it's always neat to hear those stories where that was the missing piece for that person, that individual. Again, vitamin D, how we convert it can really vary. It's one of the variables there, how we actually genetically deal with it in your body. Omega-3s, we can get plant-based omega-3s called alpha-linoleic acid from things like walnuts, hemp hearts, chia. But there is a SNP, which I realize I didn't explain what that is. SNP, or SNP, is how we say it, is a single nucleotide polymorphism. And that is a genetic variation that can be pretty common in the population, or variably common. And one is for omega-3 conversion from plant plant forms to the active forms that we directly get from, say, fish, which are called EPA and DHA, those active forms. The body has to do some biochemical acrobatics to turn alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, the vegetable form of omega-3s, or plant-based one, to EPA and DHA, particularly DHA, which is really, really important for the brain wiring and longevity. So that's why we may need other forms, or to supplement it. If someone had that mutation, they would really need to take more than just dietary forms of food. Like if they're just eating plant-based sources of omega-3s, they would, I highly suggest they would take algae oil, which has those EPA and DHA. That's partly how the seafood is getting it into them, or at least some fish, the smaller fish at some point ate those to get those levels in their body. Neurotransmitters can be affected. Serotonin, dopamine, our pleasure reward neurotransmitter, and even norepinephrine, which is sort of a neurotransmitter around a hormone, can all be impacted by genetics, and that's something worth looking at. And then how we detoxify things, you know, talking about toxins. Glutathione is one of the major antioxidants and detoxifying molecules. Think of it like the bouncer in our body. And the more active a cell is, usually the more glutathione a healthy one will have. The sicker we are, the more depleted we'll become in glutathione. So we really, really want to support that. And genetics can play a role in impacting glutathione in the body in a negative way. And the flip side, treatment for all sorts of neurological or brain conditions can be impacted by giving large amounts of glutathione over time and supporting the body to maintain and use it as well. Again, I would say it's supportive in case of depression, but something worth looking at if we're suspecting something like neuroinflammation, or even there's liver problems going on and depression at the same time. And then detoxification of hormones can be an issue, which can be investigated. Again, another thing, the one thing I'll say is it's really easy to get the genetic information. I'm not talking about expensive tests, although there are certainly some really cool tests in the hundreds to thousands of dollars you can get for those genetics. But here you could literally use the raw data. You've done 23andMe or Ancestry.ca, and you can take that data and put it into a program for very little money and start to look at some of those genetic variations that may be impacting those pieces I mentioned. And then, holy mackerel, social isolation is not good for us. It is a big factor in a lot of disease, like more than, you know, it surprises me when I review the data there. I mean, physical diseases like heart attack, stroke, diabetes, you name it, it just impacts everything negatively, but certainly our depression and other mental health is really impacted. And much around with sleep quality, which is I was saying earlier on, really ties in there. You can read the list, but it plays a big problem. And there's been so much of that social isolation now with COVID and restrictions, and you know, distress associated with how do I interact in public? Do I wear a mask? How do people feel about, like, there's lots of stressors there to go along with that too. But just the fact that we're not getting out and seeing people and interacting with them, or even if we are with masks, still better than nothing. But like, there's just this dampening of our normal kind of interactions, and it is so therapeutic and helpful and calming and balancing for us to have those interactions. So there's certainly been a lot less lately, so it takes more effort now to make those connections. And I would argue, although it's great that we have video technology like we're communicating over now, it is not the same as sitting in person and having a good chat. But hey, we'll take what we can get, and just, you know, something we all need to keep aware of. Let's having more interactions while the world still remains closed or limited in the way we can interact for now. And the one thing I want to point out, and I won't belabor it, is connection versus connectivity. Just because someone's checking Facebook or Instagram or other social media all the time, that does not equate to social connection. They're very different. Social connection is when humans interact one-on-one. We read the facial features. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance and a lot more that comes out of that, which you probably just intuitively know or feel when you think about it. Social media, well, can help facilitate it when we're using it appropriately and minimally as possible. It can also interfere and be a stressor. So don't let yourself confuse one for the other. Real in human interaction, even if it's over video, is far more profound than followers or quippy conversations or flame wars one's getting on social media. You should probably know, but so I won't go on about that. So let's talk about some solutions here, and then I'll get to some Q&A at the end. So the key things about dealing with natural remedies for depression is I'm going to treat you, each person as individual. So it's to find out, don't let that list again overwhelm you. Seeing your naturopathic doctor is about us figuring out what are the key factors there for you and then addressing them in a prioritized order so we can get the most leverage, get you feeling better sooner. And even if there's some of those little remaining pieces left, then we can deal with them as sort of step 2, 3. Because those things can take time to resolve or put into balance, of course. And we want to deal with the underlying causes, which is what we've been talking about. And the key thing is, of course, and it's a little bit my professional bias, is putting out inflammation, or I call it the fire in your house, so just proverbial house, or in this case, your body and brain. And if indicated, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, can be real profound. So these are just things I listed on the left there as sort of big leverage points if they're indicated. Approach, and a couple of leverage points there. Vitamins, minerals, talked about most of these already, so I'm not going to read them off, but I put, ruling out iron deficiency at the top of the list, followed by the thyroid nutrients, iodine and selenium. Most people don't get much iodine in their diet unless you're eating iodized salt or a lot of seaweed. Selenium, you can get adequate amount if you're eating 3 or more Brazil nuts a day. And there are other sources, but that's just one easy one that's vegan friendly. And lesser, but still playing some role, magnesium and zinc. They stimulate something called brain-derived nerve factor. So they have a positive role on brain health in that regard. And again, these are not really therapeutic uses. Like if these were in balance, putting more in wouldn't necessarily cause a big benefit if you're experiencing depression. But getting them to adequate levels when they're low or out of balance can play a big role. Certainly if your thyroid's low, iodine, selenium, big, iron's low, then getting it back in is going to be really important. And then the B vitamins, vitamin B9, methylfolate in its active form, and vitamin B6 are really can be very, very important for improving mood or treating depression. To a lesser degree, more related to B9 is vitamin B12, methyl or hydroxycobalamin, which are 2 different forms of it. And then, of course, the sunshine vitamin, vitamin D. And of course, there's Iron Man for the iron. Oh, we miss you, Tony Stark. Herbs and supplements that can help. St. John's wort is SJW. You may read or heard it's not that effective. It's not a good remedy for major depressive disorder, but it can be very good for mild and even some cases of moderate depression. I wouldn't use it alone, which is often how some of the studies are done. So I wouldn't throw it out of the window. And I've certainly seen it be very helpful. Even if that's one of the few things people are using, it's not all I would recommend. But St. John's wort, local, almost a weed, grows really abundantly. I had tons of it in my property in Salt Spring, but it can be really great for mood. Just have to be a little careful if you're on other medications, because it can interfere with certain medications based on how it's processed through the liver. So just a heads up there. Rhodiola is a beautiful, very gentle flower that has an effect of being a bit more energizing and lowering anxiety. It can be a bit more helpful for sleep as well. If sleep is really impacted, rhodiola could be one to put in the mix. And if certainly with depression is fatigue, you're just having trouble getting going or getting out of bed, rhodiola can really be an uplifting herb to take. Just be careful of the dosing before bed. Curiously enough, really high doses actually can be a little bit more sedating or not as stimulating. So it can be used before bed, but you just have to make sure you're cautious that you're not taking a lower dose that's stimulating. Sort of a little counterintuitive there, but that's the way it goes in most people. Saffron is a beautiful herb. It's that bright red one in the lower corner there. Really great. It has some really good data for being antidepressant. And despite it being a very expensive herb, some of the supplements that's in are not too expensive, all considered. They're more moderately priced compared to the cooking with it. And it's a really beautiful, powerful antioxidant. It has a really strong effect on libido. So if your depression is really impacting your libido, I would put saffron high on the list. It's a beautiful herb. It's just really reparative and restorative to the brain and body. 5-HTP is an active form of tryptophan, and it is a supplement you get in a capsule, and it basically is a precursor to serotonin. So depression is often linked to low serotonin levels. It's why some of the more common medications are recycling serotonin, like serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And then serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors are pretty common ones that are prescribed in depression, also for in some cases of anxiety as well. So 5-HTP is a really great remedy to add in in depression. The only caution is if you're on some of those medications that are affecting the serotonin pathways, is you have to be careful when taking larger doses. You can get something called Serotonin Syndrome, and it can be very serious, a medical emergency. If you're only using 5-HTP, the likelihood of getting that is pretty remote. But just definitely, if you go into higher doses, get some direction from a naturopathic doctor or a doctor who has training in integrative medicine. And then SAMe, I haven't used a lot of it, so I don't have a lot of anecdotes to share with you there, but SAMe is another encapsulated nutrient. It can be a little pricier, good for joints too. So if you happen to have arthritis and depression, SAMe might be one of the remedies you put in the mix there that can be quite effective for mood. It has a big role in certain pathways in the body. And now if inflammation is playing a role, or there's clearly inflammation in your body, in your gut or elsewhere, then here are the anti-inflammatories I would recommend using to help put that out in your body, in your gut, and in your brain. It's key here, if you seem to have, if there seems to be a link there for you between gut, body inflammation, and the depression, then these are the remedies you want, because they'll get it across the blood-brain barrier, across customs into your brain. Curcumin, which is the active ingredient from turmeric, which is that lovely root up on the upper right there, is really fast-acting and also stimulates brain-derived nerve factor, so it's restorative, reparative to the brain. It's being researched in Alzheimer's disease, of all things. It's showing some promise there. But curcumin, the active ingredient, very great for inflammation in the body. Very safe. It's good for the liver. It helps reduce cancer risk. It does a whole bunch of things. It's a good multitasker. It's a great herb to take for lots of reasons. And then boswellia, which is Indian frankincense, also very potent, really profound effect on the brain. I heard one senior doctor taught me saying it's comparable to its effect to prednisone, which is a corticosteroid, which has a strong effect on inflammation in the brain, but has some unfortunate side effects, like I mentioned, possibly depression in large, long doses. So if boswellia will work for you, that's a good choice. And it's also fast acting. And so I like the combination of the two. Actually, you can get remedies that have boswellia and curcumin. Sometimes ginger's in the mix as well, which doesn't really get in the brain as much, but has a good gut anti-inflammatory and body anti-inflammatory effect and soothes digestion. And omega-3 fatty acids, you want to make sure you're getting enough EPA and DHA, like I mentioned. You're getting it from vegetable sources. You may want to check your genetics to see how well you're converting, and or to be safe, get some algae that has the EPA and DHA already converted for you, because that's hard to do from plants in high enough doses. For the brain in particular, we want DHA about 200 milligrams or more a day, and the EPA minimally a gram, but I'd say at least 2 grams or more to lower inflammation. It's slow acting though, so if you're all sore and inflamed, don't expect fish oil alone to put the fire out immediately. It takes weeks to take full effect because it has to kind of incorporate into the body. But it can be a big player in the longer run. An anti-inflammatory diet, which is largely eating more plants and fiber and healthy protein sources, and cutting out processed foods, refined sugars and flours, limiting or removing nightshade family vegetables like peppers and potatoes and eggplant. Doesn't mean you never eat them, but if you're in an inflamed state, you may want to limit them. And then certainly eliminating allergies, food allergies and sensitivities, because they cause the ongoing inflammation to the body and brain. And just depending on who you are and how sensitive you are to them, depends how much, will determine how much the brain is impacted by them. And those are blood tests. Usually you have to have a blood test to see what food allergies or sensitivities that you have. They can be very helpful. Talk or not therapies and movement. Counseling, I won't go into details there, but really finding someone who you can work with and a style and personality that resonates with you, and you can have an ongoing trusting relationship is really important. Lots of different forms of counseling and approaches there. So, pick something that works for you, but, having someone to talk to who is unbiased and can help direct you is so important. Just to be heard openly is so healing to have that connection. Even has to be over Zoom right now. Neurofeedback is a device that can be connected with leads to the brain. Totally comfortable. I've had it done myself, and it reads different brain waves, looks at kind of imbalances there, and then can cause a stimulation that feels like not much like anything, maybe a little bit of a humming, and it can really help with lowering stress and be helpful with improving mood. And I've seen it be helpful, but it's something that it takes a while for the brain to repattern thoughts and behaviors. So Don't expect to change. Just like meditation, if you start meditating or doing relaxation practice, don't expect to change overnight. It's great if you get some great experiences early on to encourage you, but to really get out of, the sort of pathways that have been laid down, say in case of depression, it can take weeks to months, which is why having extra supports to help lift our mood, support us until we can start to change those bigger shifts in our brain. Neurofeedback usually takes minimally 10, more like 20 treatments. So something you've done once or twice and didn't find it helpful, you probably didn't do it for long enough, or it might not be the right treatment for you. Sometimes it can be cost prohibitive. Exercise, which I know can be the hardest thing when you're feeling depressed. I have gone through periods of depression, and just getting out of bed can seem like the most difficult task. So any movement is so important for our mood. It's like it's the annoyingly free antidepressant, but the hardest thing to overcome. Overcome that inertia to turn it into positive momentum. So that's where, getting out and doing something you enjoy, starting really gently. And I say here, gentler, slower. Like if you're used to working out for 45 minutes, start with 5. If you're in a state of depression, just get out there and have a win every day. Don't try and have a big blowout exercise that's going to leave you sore for days. That's not a win. It's just going to be discouraging. And that's just good general advice. Start slow and build. Have accountability partners and walk if someone's in your bubble, or you can walk at a distance in an open air space. Have someone to help you go there, because we all feel like days we're not going to go out, but certainly when you're in a state of depression or even just low mood, you're going to feel even less like going out and doing something, physical exertion. So have someone there who's going to help support you and keep you accountable, and be kind to yourself. Even professional athletes and those who are high performers dread going and exercising some days, and it's not always easy and natural, but it's, we can start casting enough votes again to doing it, or create positive momentum, then it's we can achieve it. It can be one of the pieces that really can be helpful. I've seen exercise be key for some people, pulling themselves out of depression and keeping themselves out of it. And again, if you're feeling that low energy, remedies like rhodiola I mentioned earlier, and even just B vitamins can be so profound, getting your vitamin D optimized. And then self-expression. Depression is often we're dwelling in the past to some degree, right? It's a hyper focus on something in the past that hasn't been resolved, that's not resolved for us. And so exploring that, helping express and move beyond it or transform that is so key. Especially if we're addressing the other neurochemical, biochemical, body or physiological issues that may be contributing or causing it, and then having that other piece of focus and expression is so key. Just living a good life, but certainly in case of depression, where we feel so unmotivated, so worthless often, and so many negative thoughts. So getting those out, expressing them, start transforming them, and getting some real positive gratitude thoughts can be helpful. And finally, here we are at the end, folks. Now for something completely different. Oh, John Cleese and Monty Python. Are you shocked, like the kid and Graham Chapman there as the general, the uptight general? Oh my, isn't appropriate at all. Laughter, joy, humor. It's going to be hard when you're feeling very flat in depression, but doing things that bring you more joy, being around people that make you laugh is so important. It releases lots of feel-good neurotransmitter and hormones in our body, and so casting more votes in that way is important. So whatever makes you laugh, it may not be Monty Python, but find something ridiculous. Laugh at the absurdities of life when you can. Hope you enjoyed that talk. Thank you all who tuned in and listened or are listening to the recording on Facebook. If you want to get a hold of me, this is how you get a hold of me. I am practicing and owner, director of Empower Health Clinic. This is the phone number, and you can email to get an appointment set up with me or get a hold of me through betternow@empowerhealth.ca, or you can check out our website, or you can book online as well there. If you want to find me on social media, I rarely use Facebook, but I do check in there once in a while. I use Instagram a little bit more regularly, so there's that if you want to see what I'm up to. It's often photos of my son nowadays, but sometimes I try to put other things up there. So yeah, if you're looking to, like I say, book an appointment with me, get a consult, or ask me any questions from this talk, please do so. I'm going to open the floor to Q&A for a few minutes here, but if you want to do it in private, fire an email and let me know. how I can help you there, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you so much.